last month seemed to be mostly news around the seed funding, and so anything else new going on? Start from, yeah, go ahead, Florence.
I'll just go. Well, since you called on me first already. So one of the things that we've been doing is, and I'm hoping we can talk about this today, is as the 4 hubs, we look at, how do we all work together, but a couple of us lead each thing and then, bring the others along.
Right.
So John and I are going to take the leadership across the 4 hubs. We spoke to the other EDs about the whole cybersecurity space. And so that includes the trustworthy data working group stuff. We're also going to be looking at the cybersecurity initiatives across the hubs and try to figure out what we're all doing and how we can help each other. There's a social cybersecurity stuff in the South, and we have a new connected healthcare cybersecurity workshop we're working on in the Northeast, and a bunch of stuff. So that was something we wanted to see if we could talk a little bit about as a family today, and think about what the future could hold.
Sure, let's put a pin in that for a little discussion, and maybe, so we do have I'll sort of let everybody know, we do have a little bit of other discussion that I wanted to get started on after this, which is sort of around the notion of a theme for the spring, so that we can start looking for people to recruit for talks and go into having more of a focus on a particular set of topics, or a particular topic to dive a little deeper in on over the course of the semester. So
okay,
and maybe one of those is cyber infrastructure and security.
Could be cybersecurity. And the other thing I just want to mention, last time we were talking about the COVID information commons, and we've delivered our 3rd search mechanism, which has PI data in it. So now we're looking at the kick follow-on, and we spoke to the HPCC crowd this morning, and John
Right.
Towns and the crowd. And so we're looking at how we can work together on this kick follow-on. And I think I mentioned it the last time, you got all excited, Niall.
Yeah.
So we don't have to do it today, but I'm going to be writing up probably an RCN and a raise proposal. And so we can think about it.
Please keep me in the loop on that. It's been, well, I don't know around the room how many other CSSIs went in, but it's been quite a proposal month, I will say that. So I will have some time in the coming months now to actually focus on other things.
Very nice. Okay, that's it.
All right. We started the Northeast. Why don't we go to the Midwest?
Sure, thanks. I'll just put a couple of links in the chat here for folks for a couple of upcoming activities. So the hub is working with some partners in our region and nationally on what we're calling the Water Data Forum, which is a series of events throughout 2021 focused on bringing together different communities that are doing work in the water space. It spans everything from academic researchers to industry to government and quasi-government agencies. So really interesting set of talks coming up on that we're getting ready to launch, focused on cyber infrastructure and data in the water area. So you can see that initial set of topics on that website that I linked to there. More immediately next week, there's a meeting on cyber infrastructure for bridge data. This is a spoke project in the Midwest region. This is a workshop that has happened for the past few years that is recurring again this year. So folks interested in physical infrastructure and cyber infrastructure connections may want to have a look at that as well. Jim Wilgenbush, do you have anything else to add for Midwest activities?
Yeah, it's along the lines of cybersecurity. So Purdue is hosting, I should say, a series on cybersecurity in higher ed, CUI workshop, and so we had our kickoff just the day before yesterday, and had about 33 other institutions participating in that event. A lot of great knowledge sharing, and given that this was the kickoff, I think we'll hear more about that, and I'll certainly report out as we progress.
Very good. Let's go out west, since I think, Melissa, do you have any updates from what's going on in the West Hub?
No, with the exception of not sure we mentioned this last month. We recently, in partnership with the UCSD Border Alliance group, ran a COVID data challenge. There was a whole sort of contest with that, and prizes were awarded a couple weeks ago. I'll see if I can find the link to that web page and drop that in the chat in a few minutes. But that seemed to be successful. It was really interesting for me to sit in on part of that because of the breadth of people that participated in it. We had people from high school and local community college, some transfer students, and faculty and researchers from a range of organizations. So that was great. And those data sets are available still, and we're also working to get them cataloged and available in a couple of different ways as well. So that's all I have to report today. There's probably other things going on, but I'm afraid I didn't get a briefing ahead of the call today.
Sure. And on the south side, I mean, I don't have too much exposure on that as well. Jason, do you have any information to share? Or
I'm afraid I don't. Our participant is not here at this meeting, so.
Right. No, I sort of knew that. I didn't know if they passed on notes or anything to you.
I'm afraid not. Apologize.
I know there's a lot of work going on, sort of on working towards some meetings for the spring and other pieces. You know, how to do the all hands meeting and things like that. But those will be topics probably more for the spring for people to report out on. So hopefully we can get a little info in next month. Either I'll ping folks for it or make sure that we get people here. Not to pick on you twice, Melissa, but I'll pick on you twice. Anything new and interesting coming out of the open storage?
OSN? Yeah, yes. We are running a webinar series right now, the aim of which will be a series of concept papers that'll be shared in the community quite broadly, and also help us move toward the proposal for the next phase of the OSN. I'll also drop the link in for those. You do have to register for those webinars. I'll grab those and drop it in the chat as well. Okay. And so those are happening. In fact, there is one next week on the 12th, and it is at noon Eastern. So I'll get that link and drop it in. That's what's happening there. We're working on policy around allocations. And yeah, so that's about it. I mean, implementation continues. We've got a handful of new user communities coming on board from pretty wide set of science communities. And I guess I would just add that while we have some really interesting and mid-size, so anywhere from tens to hundreds of terabytes of data for projects that are publicly available, we do have plenty of room on the OSN. And so this is a place where if hubs have spoke projects that have data that they want to make available or share in a distributed way for, during the life of the project, we're happy to support that.
Oh, that's good. Just questioning, as I haven't been paying as much attention as I should probably, but are there ways right now with the OSN for people to discover what public data sets are there as well?
So very reasonable question. We are in the process of, there's probably going to be a dual process to that.
Could be multiple, yeah.
Yeah, well, multiple, in part because there are some data sets that are publicly available where they're also available on a different platform, and we're providing access through a different front end. Right. And so we're going to leverage catalogs that exist in those places. So allocations that happen through the exceed process, we're still a ways off from that, but potentially resource records will be generated through that process. And lastly, we are working with a couple of organizations to see if we can develop a third-party catalog separately so that there would be there would actually be landing pages for publicly available data sets through other catalogs. So we're working on that, but we're nowhere near done in development with that, and so
You'll never be done with that one. That one always is an evolving data discovery, but it's good to know, because I think that's the other way to recruit people to put data on it, is to have them discover it as well. So you see the
right. Well, and we have to, we have to remember too, which whenever we give talks about OSN is about active use data. We're not a repository for post-project, dumping of data sets. So
yes.
yeah. All right, that's me for today.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. And sorry about the.
Thank you. Oh, no worries. No worries. Happy to do it.
So that's all good. That's all good news. And I know we're sort of going into December on these, so we'll hopefully hear sort of some more by then. But we won't all be at supercomputing, so or at least we won't be physically there this year. So we'll probably foster some more discussions on these things later. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and double up. I know Florence had the suggestion that we talk a little bit about cybersecurity and sort of coordinating efforts, and maybe that should be topic one. So why don't we see if that fits? But let me introduce the sort of spring topical deep dive. When we were talking about this last time, I scribbled down some notes that I think I've translated into English, or at least into words that I can convey. I couldn't read my own handwriting, so it's getting bad. But I had a few ideas on here, and I've added a few others. And so these are just sort of seeds for ideas of possible topics that we could cover. I think Florence's idea of cybersecurity is a timely one, and since we do have Jim and Florence here, I think it's one that we can definitely talk to. Some of the other ones that I have, which are just sort of general, and we might want to dive down on some pieces of them, might be research reproducibility. I know there's a lot of work that goes around that, and a lot that's played to it. I think even just especially getting people to understand the different forms of reproducibility is sort of important, because it isn't just about making sure you get the same number every time. There are other forms of it. Improving collaboration on workflows. I know we're going to hear a little bit about workflows and improving that in just a minute, but that's been a piece that I've been working on, for quite some time, but the collaborative nature of it, I know we've got some things from some of the DARPA projects that we have that we could talk to, and I'm sure there are other ones around to talk about those things and how cyber infrastructure around things like containers and more flexible schema databases and other things can all help in that from the CI point of view, but then also how users who aren't gurus can participate in that. I put down sort of pathways towards fair data for more users. I know everybody likes to say things about fair data. It's hard. And, there may be things that we can talk about with different repositories or different places in how we can do better at that. There's always metadata standards and translations and all then ontologies and all those sort of things. I put it down. I don't think it's probably a topic specifically that we could cover, but there may be ways to cover pieces of it, maybe in different domains or other areas or lessons learned. And then the last one I put down, which we haven't talked a whole lot about, but is sort of about AI sharing, both in techniques and trained models. And those might be interesting things to talk to as well. But those were sort of just the off the top of my head few that were more sort of CIE. There may also be, we could very easily go into health analytics or, into particular domains if we're going into, hazards or climate or, any of the other ones that we could dive into. So I think that's sort of an intro on that. Why don't I throw it open to everybody to sort of give opinions on these and see if there's anything that really stands out as something we should cover in the spring. With the caveat, I'll just say, I know COVID would be a great topic, but everybody's doing stuff on COVID. And I think to get people here on a voluntary meeting once a month on a Friday, maybe even some COVID relief would be a good thing. So talk about something else. So Florence, you want to talk a little bit about what you were thinking on the CI, on the cyber infrastructure, the cybersecurity portion there, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not on mute. So there are two things. One is, Jim has been working with us on the Trustworthy Data Working Group, Jim Basney, and maybe Jim Wilkenbush too. And, John McMullen and I have been participating quite a bit from the hubs. And so there are a couple of things we're thinking. One is, how do we leverage the Trustworthy Data Working Group work to benefit our constituency, the scientists and researchers? So we have a couple thoughts. And then how do we increase awareness that people have to be thinking about this stuff and how we help them actually do it? I think people need to be thinking about it more and making sure that they're doing what they should do for good hygiene and all the new things that keep coming about for cybersecurity and data. So a couple of things we were thinking about was to work with the Trustworthy Data Working Group to identify some of the best practices and tools people are already using, that we could communicate in some way. Then we could think about either doing a webinar to communicate the information and or having a collaborative workshop to discuss, the increasing challenges in cybersecurity for our scientific and research, partners, and how we can work together. So those are just some ideas that we had on working with TDWG, the Trustworthy Data Working Group data. And then separately, as I mentioned, John and I are talking about how to bring together a cohesive view of what we're doing in cybersecurity across the hubs, which we would love, I think, input on. So those are the two ideas. John, did you want to add to that? Did I do okay?
That was great. Thanks, Florence. I guess one of the discussions that we had, one of the open questions that we had was who is the audience for some of these activities? And so, would it be like a CISO level discussion around tools and issues? Would it be more of a operations hands-on workshop kind of thing? So I think we're still trying to decide what makes the most sense for the people that we have engaged in this.
Or do we think it's the scientists and the researchers themselves,
Mhm.
or the research computing facilitators? Like who should we be talking to? Who do we want to increase awareness with, and who do we want to get to help do something differently?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think we're going through CMMC right now, with specific interest in CUI and defense related information, and what I found is that all the groups that you just mentioned, Florence, like think of this in very different ways, not surprisingly, right? And what I guess where I've benefited from the discussion that kicked off on Wednesday in Purdue was, really hearing more from people outside of research computing, that are more sort of firmly situated within compliance. Our SBOs all have different ideas about this too. A lot of them have to do with sort of onboarding and workflows, which are really, I think, essential. I kind of like the idea as far as an audience, but I'm not married to this, but I like the idea of trying to make it broad and invite participation, kind of explicitly across the areas that you mentioned. I think one way to maybe do that would be if we invite speakers to say, this is going to be sort of a technical examination of some of the requirements, but then really try to make sure that all audiences are welcome, might be an approach, because those communities can really learn a lot from even the deeper dives, and then also contribute to the discussion. But it's a great topic. I would totally vote for that. If we're voting, I think that the timeliness of something like what you proposed is great, and I think there's a lot of different venues that we can push that information out to and potentially get a broad audience to contribute to the discussion.
So I'm even thinking of I'll just put this out, we can change the entire format of this. I mean, we've been doing sort of we have a meeting, we have lightning talks for 2 years. Do we want to turn it into, even in the fall, having some meetings just be 5-minute talks of a panel and then open discussion kind of things for the rest of the hour. And, I mean, along these lines, I think, just cover the policies that we're all talking about in concrete ways. What is 800-171 versus CUA versus HIPAA in real ways, not in the fear ways that everybody talks about them and keeps anything from happening, but in realistic implementation and protection ways. Or I wrote down horror stories and how to not be that project, but
we have some of those,
I know that there are plenty of those sort of things that we can talk to. And I don't know whether those get sort of the CIOs, CSOs in the room, which might be interesting, but it's not going to get the researchers, because the researchers, they just look at these things as pieces of compliance, the check boxes that they have to do. So then what we want to do is we want to have other talks equal to that to teach researchers that it's more than just a checkbox. It's part of being safe and secure and being a good citizen type thing. Or,
or as someone who lost control of their instrument, like, the tool in Western Australia, right, during the neutron star collision, or someone who lost their data or found out their data was compromised, a year and a half after they submitted it, or whatever, so
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that could be another one, why this matters to the researcher, why it matters to the CSO, why it matters to the developer, put it in terms for the developer. Maybe that's what we do, is let's pick 4 cybersecurity. I'm brainstorming like I do. You all know me.
yeah.
In terms of
anytime I'm going off, but we could do easily, since we've got January, February, March, April, and then maybe a wrap up seminar or something at the end to try and put a bow on it that people can take away in all the different ways.
In terms of format, I like the idea of a panel, in the sense that we could have a series, but then there's so many individuals and institutions that would have something to share, that one subject could be from the vantage of 4 different participants, and and sort of just sweet, and relatively short, but enough that the panelists could say, and if you want to learn more about this, go to this URL, if they've gone as far as developing a white paper or something like that.
Or even, I think we ended with, hey, can we, for those people that are interested in doing a deeper dive on even these topics, here's a schedule that we might be able to set up. We can have these meetings anytime these days. It's not like we have to have them on the first Friday, and we can have breakout sessions during the month, and maybe somebody can come and report as to what came of that at the next meeting. If we have enough people to gravitate to that. But that's the challenge, I think, is to get us to that point.
So let's talk about that, having enough people. So these calls tend to be rather small. This is like the people, who sit around our Thanksgiving dining room table, right? These tend to be small. This is like the core family. And we love it when more people come, but it's not broad, right, at this point. So the question is, if we really want to have broader impact across the community, and if we do, if we consider ourselves, and anyone who comes to this is welcome as part of the core team, and we plan this workshop, we could actually, put the word out, ask for people who would like to be on a panel and share the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Either they have a great answer, they've lived through it and they want to warn other people, or something else. And then we attract people by the different, cohorts, as we were saying. They'd all be represented on the panel, like 3 or 4 constituencies. And then we have breakout sessions for each of those constituencies. So they can talk about, what's your reality? Gosh, what do we really need? And maybe part of what we present are some of the best practices, that come out of the follow on to the TDWG. And Jim Basney, I'd love to hear what you have to think about how we would get those answers from the crowd. So maybe we try to do something where we go out to our Northeast Hub distribution lists with this idea, with the cybersecurity workshop plan. Just a thought, because I feel like everyone here is so smart and knows so much stuff. And it would be great if we could share more.
No, I mean, that's that. Well, I'll just say from my point, that's the whole goal here, is to broaden this and get, we had, last year, I think we definitely had more participation from people coming to specific topics. I think I really do think part of this is COVID fatigue. So we'll try in the spring and see what we can do. Maybe we can get more people on it. The one other question I have is that little red ball up in the upper left-hand quarter. Do we record these? Do we not record breakouts? How do we get it so that people are real if we're diving into weeds?
So you can't usually record breakouts, like in a Zoom setting, you can't record all the breakouts. So yay, our decision's made. But for the keynotes, hopefully they would be valuable in the panel.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. But I think, we need to think about details like that as well, because
I totally agree with you.
Making sure that people feel free to say, no, that's completely wrong, and here's my horror story that nobody else should ever hear about.
Or I have a friend. They could do it that way.
Well, yes, you can do it that way.
You can do it that way.
So we do risk, if we sort of get real workshoppy on this, we do risk, being overlapping with some things that are happening right now. As I mentioned, the event at Purdue, even though that's CUI focused, the format is very much workshop. It is a workshop, and then there are breakouts, and they're expecting to deliver a report because they're funded by NSF. And so I just wonder, my initial thought was if we did something that required less of a commitment, but was of such a great interest that, people could stop by, and it would be like jumping into the series whenever wouldn't be a problem. If they could come to 2 and 3, but not 1 and 4, it would still be incredibly useful.
Oh no, I agree. So I just looked at the clock. So I'm gonna take the role of keeping us on time, or at least trying to. We can go a little longer on the talk. That's not a big deal. But I want to just say, it sounds to me, at least like by the discussion, that this one has a good start right now to get us going in the spring. So can I throw it open to everybody? I don't think we have to approve it right now, but let's make sure that, I would say let's do this in the spring, objections only by the next meeting, and move forward. Let's start putting together lists of people that we can start to even get for the beginnings of these discussions in January to seed this. And I'd also say, towards Jim's point on this not being a workshop, I would rather we pitch it and actually make it be, let's have a panel, and then if there are people who want to go and do more, that's sort of the matchmaking aspect of what we try and do. And those groups are free to use our resources. Zoom meetings are free now, so anybody can give them one. But we could do that in some way, and then maybe just report on that back. But it's not an official thing. It's something to get people talking about these things and broaden participation across a larger audience, which has a little less weight to it, which is kind of what I think this working group's all about. So I see nods. Nobody's thrown a tomato. Let's go with that for now. But if anybody has any other ideas on topics, I'm welcome to discuss those as well. But I think you're right. This is a good, timely one, and we have some good people already ready to go on this. So, all right. Well, can we shift gears to talking a little bit about workflows, which are less stressful than cybersecurity and just as important, I think. So, but you have to have secure workflows to make them work. So let me flip some tabs here. And so I just want to welcome Cindy Bruyere, I believe. Is that how you pronounce last name? Thank you. First name like Niall, I'm used to it getting mangled. And Mike Daniels, who are coming to us from NCAR, UCAR in Boulder, and I believe, Mike, are you up at CSU or are you in Boulder?
I have an affiliation with CSU as well. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I saw the CSU post on there too. So, but they're coming to us from Boulder, and they're here to talk about accelerating scientific workflows and work. Well, Cindy's been working on the Capacity Center for Climate and Weather Extremes, which is taking all of the weather data and climate models and many things over the multiple decades and trying to make it usable, which is a huge task. Having it's even more complicated in atmospheric science than it is in astronomy, and I tried to do it in astronomy for many years. And Mike is working with this group as well around complex computing, software engineering, data management, and cyber infrastructure systems for geosciences. And he's been working on governance, real-time data acquisition, and development of science workflows. And they're here to tell us about some of those science workflows. So rather than me take up all the time introducing them, Cindy, are you starting?
Yes, I will start, and Mike
Please share your screen and let's go.
Okay, so there we go.
Thank
so
you.
First of all, thanks for having us. And yes, we do want to talk about accelerating scientific workflows. And my interest in this has been because I work, I lead a group at NCAR called the Capacity Center for Climate and Weather Extremes. So as the name say, we are looking at weather extremes on climate timescales, which means that we're looking at very high resolution big data sets over multiple decades and out to the end of the century. So that high resolution data over such a really long time starts turning into big data problems. So I've been really interested in this from that perspective. So we have a pilot project funded through NSF Earth Cube that we call ASSET, that looks at accelerated workflows. And what we were really interested in is seeing that there's so many tools that has already been developed and is part of the Earth Cube repository. We wanted to start using those tools and making it easier for people to use the tools. What we also landed up, and what I want to talk about today, is the whole part of why people are not doing this. So there are a lot of data available, but people are not really picking up somebody else's workflow or somebody else's software and doing something with it. So if I can get this thing to move on. Okay. So the team that we have is myself and Mike. We also partner with Scott Beckham from CU and Yolanda Gill from UCS. And then we have collaborators across from UCS doing a lot of the workflow development. We have partners across NCAR, and we also have a partner at UCR, and that partner is very important. Emma Harrison, I can never pronounce her name correctly. That partnership for us is also very important because we look at workflows from a scientific perspective, and she look at workflows from a physical perspective, so collecting soil sample data and how you can use the same workflow systems as what we use also in a physical sense. So here's the problem that I think we have all seen and all face, and you guys have just talked about this. We often talk about the 80-20 problem. In other words, we spend 80% of our time looking for data, finding data, manipulating data, and only 20% of our time doing science. And if we can flip this around and spend less time on developing code and manipulating data, we should accelerate the time to science significantly. But there's in my mind, there's two pieces to it. If you sort of broke them down into big components, and there's a lot of nuances in between those. And the one is really the data and the manipulation of the data. The other part of it is reproducibility. And that one is really complicated. There's levels of reproducibility. And here's a classic example that I want to show you guys. And that is, we asked the question, has climate change increased losses from US hurricanes. And instead of doing research, we just started looking at literature and came up with two classic papers from two big names in the hurricane research world. One was published in 2008 and one was published in 2015. And both of these people happen to have used the exact same data source and came up with two very distinctly different answers. One came up with 0 trend in losses due to hurricanes, and one came up with 136 million a year increase because of hurricane losses. So, you know, that asks a question of, what is the problem? Was it that they actually used slightly different data? Did they manipulate the data differently? Or did they just have different techniques in looking at the data? And it was more a coding and a science perspective that is bringing out this very big difference. So what we did in this project is we did a very small experiment. We actually did it twice, and I'm just going to show you the one experiment. We did an experiment saying, well, if you have two scientists, first of all, I want to sort of highlight where I think the problems are. And that is, you would have two scientists looking at the exact same question. They're both doing data discovery. They both develop tools, and they both analyze the data. And typically, they're probably going to spend more or less the same time on all three of these topics. And they could potentially come up with two different answers. So a trend versus no trend. And we have a number of times said, if only we can utilize what one person has done, hand it over the fence to another person, that means that we could potentially solve a number of things. We could solve the time that somebody spends on doing data discovery and development of tools. But because we pass over the same tools, scientists too has a significant amount more time to do analysis and do science. And hopefully we can solve reproducibility by making sure that they both come up with the same answer. Unfortunately, the real world is significantly more messy than this. A has developed it, B is using it, and everything is so much clearer. So some of the really big problems that we have identified in our little experiment is we never ask the exact same question. So our science is not about reproducing the exact same thing, and we're never going to do this. We ask similar questions that may or may not use the same tools. We might ask identical questions for different parts of the world, or even for different time periods. So you might ask a question of what do tropical storms look like in 1960s versus what tropical storms is going to look like in 2050. Or you might ask the question, how is tropical storms going to look in 2050 in Australia versus America? Just the mere fact that we're asking different questions means a number of things. It means that we do not really need all the data that researcher A is using. We're going to need similar data, but it's going to be different. So we both still have to do data discovery. The other part is, because we ask different questions, we do not need all the tools that has been developed by a specific researcher. We need parts of the tools that is developed. And we very often, as far as tools are concerned, we either do not share and it's just not available, so we do code it up. Or one of the things that we found with the EarthCube tools is that there's a lot of tools, but they packages. And nobody really wants the entire package. People want bits and pieces and modules out of the packages rather than the entire package. And then the other piece that is very important is the fact that we are all different people. So our skill levels and computing environments are different. And even if something works 100% on one computer, it might not work on a different computer, or somebody is maybe coding in R and my skills are in Python. so I can't use it because the code has been developed in a language that I don't know. And because I don't need the entire module, I need to pull out pieces of it. It is much easier to just write that one piece that I need in the language that I want, rather than to try and figure out what somebody has done in a computer language that I don't even understand. So this is the tools that was developed. So our asset workflow design tool, it's available on this website that I have up at the top here. I do want to point out that this is a beta version, or it's probably an alpha version still of the code, right, Mike? So because it's a pilot project and we do not have funding to continue developing it, it is going to stay in an alpha version for the foreseeable future. But basically what it is, you can drag and drop your regular workflow, but also attach where the data is coming from, what tools you've used to do it, as well as the notebooks that go with them can be attached. So I just want to give you, I've got two or three more slides. I want to give you a quick overview of what we've done to try and tease out where the really big bottlenecks in workflows are. So what we've done is we've asked a different question. We asked what the environments associated with rapidly intensifying hurricanes are, and we wanted to look at them in Australia. So we gave this question to researcher A, and we asked specific things. We asked that they use current climate data, they only use reanalysis and observational data, and that they specifically use surface pressure to answer the question. Apart from those directives, they were told that they must document all their work and they must create a workflow for everything that they have done. They were also given the ability to code up in any language. So we were really trying to create a real world simulation. All the documentation, the workflow, and the notebooks was handed over to researcher 2. What we did here to simulate a more real world environment was to say that this person needed to look at current and future climate data, and they must use data from a climate model. So if the data is different, it is the same region. And instead of using surface pressure, they needed to use a field called maximum potential intensity that gives you similar information, but it's a different field. And we wanted to see how easy it was for the researcher B to pick up what researcher A has done and where the bottlenecks really turned out to be. So this is a breakdown of the time that they spent on the different components. And I want to point out quite a few things on this slide. First of all, during conversations and even thinking of myself, documentation always seems to be a really hard thing to do because we always do it at the end of the project. Both of the people spent a very small amount of time on documentation, and they did hand in a lot of good documentation for this project. And they both also said that they were surprised that they did not spend as much time on documenting their workflows as it felt like while they were doing it and as they thought it would be. So I think this, it always takes too much time to do it is probably something that we could try and get people to understand that it really doesn't take that much time. The second one I want to point out is data. And again, I think the notion is that we very often say that it is problematic to find, or if we only had a way to share data and point each other to the data discovery will be significantly shorter. And in our case, it really wasn't the case because we designed an experiment that was similar but using different data, so they both still had to do data discovery. Coding for researcher A was significantly a big part of the project as we expected it to be. And this researcher spent only about a quarter of time on doing analysis. Handing it over to the fence, a couple of very interesting things. As we expected, the coding would be less. Researcher B was a Python person, whereas researcher A was an R person. So researcher B specifically had to go and pick up a language that they did not know. There were times that researcher B simply wanted to give up and actually said, hey, can I please just write my own code because it would be easier. When we analyzed it in the end of the day, researcher A spent 13% of this, if we compare the same amount of time between the two researchers, spent 13% of that time figuring out the workflow and figuring out a new language, which was still, even adding that up with code development, was significantly less than it was writing the code from scratch. There was a 27% time saved in for researcher B, and on the overall time that this researcher spent almost half of the time that they used on analysis. But if you take this 27% out, they spend 2/3 of the time on science. So we didn't quite get the 80-20 flip, but we really got close in terms of that this research spent a significant amount more time doing research. And the end result of that was that they also produced 4 times more results than researcher 1, because researcher 1 did it for 1 time period, where researcher 2 did it for the same time period as well as 3 time periods in the future. So a couple of takeaway points. The 2 that I already mentioned, we also always say that creating code documentation takes long, and our researchers were surprised that it didn't. And developing code on your own is not always the quickest way to do it. So actually finding out how other people's code work will be quicker, and it also will help with reproducibility. The other piece that we specifically asked them to do is, as they document, they needed to make sure that each one of these pieces that they document was a module on their own. And the report back that we got was that really made a big difference. It wasn't one big module, it was pieces of modules that they can pull out what they needed. So the 2 big pieces that we think is important to take away, or takeaway points from this, is that there really are diminishing returns on the time that you spend on data discovery and wrangling, because we all use different data sources. And because of that, I think we're never going to get to a point that we can say, well, I spend 5% of my time finding data. We're always going to spend a significant amount of time finding data. And the other part is the fact that computer skills, as well as computer backgrounds that are different, is a significant bottleneck. And I think that is a very big potential and an opportunity for us to try and find that, rather than just looking at workflows and documentation, this is an opportunity to create notebook and containers that would help with the skill level that is different between users, as well as just the fact that we don't all have the same computer language behind us. And if we can put things in containers, we can move containers across the fence, which would be much better than just moving scripts across the fence. And with that, I would leave it. And Mike, do you have anything extra to add?
Yeah, all I would say is, as Cindy initially mentioned, this is a pilot project that's funded through EarthCube. And so the problem that EarthCube has is, we have a very diverse science community, and many members of the science community, they're small research teams. And so we're trying to get a handle on what are the common gaps that these research teams have. And so we viewed a workflow sketching tool. It outputs JSON, for example, at the end. Having the scientists to design and develop their workflows with a very simple tool can create a library of these that we can then mine for information. Oh, well, everybody's having or using this data set or using this tool to kind of get an idea of the landscape. And so Cindy, as a scientist, did a deep dive on her particular area of science using this tool for this express purpose of improving the time to science. So we think that at a high level, more broadly, having scientists use a workflow tool and then using that as a source of information for how a group of scientists are doing their science and what some of the stumbling blocks are. That's kind of where the tool came into play, and it's a very simple tool. And I think my experience has been that the scientists generally aren't focused on. I mean, they do have a workflow for sure. They're just not focused on documenting it and laying it out. And so we saw this tool as filling a gap for that, which also helps their small research team. They get graduate students coming in all the time and they have to explain, their processes, which of course change, but they have no kind of basis in small university departments to kind of describe their work. So at a high level, that's kind of what we looked at for this project. We just got funding to do this as a pilot. And so therefore Cindy was able to do a real deep dive on a particular science area. So that helps.
Thanks. Very interesting. Well, as usual, I've got questions, but I'll throw it open to the room before we go on. But I just wanted to, before I do, I'll just mention, you were talking early on about what happens with the real factor of reproducibility, I guess. And Russ Poldrack did a similar deep dive, taking exactly the same fMRI data. He does sort of neurological interpretations of fMRI data coming out of his Open fMRI initiative, and fed that to several people with existing tools and existing backgrounds. And they too came up with very different results. In fact, I mean, it's a Nature paper that it's fantastic, because what it means is that reproducibility isn't happening, and it's a real challenge and a real problem. So glad to see people tackling it.
Yep. I would just say, in my view, and I was in the manager of an set of observational facilities, and everybody had different
Yep.
methods and everything, of course. But I think there's total reproducibility is kind of a holy grail, and it's not like it's something we shouldn't work toward. But boy, getting 100% reproducibility across this very diverse set of scientists is awful hard to do, and it's that last mile kind of a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also extremely difficult because it's hard to pinpoint when there is reproducibility or not, because very often when the answer is different, we attribute that to the fact that we ask a different question and we are not sure. So it could be a reproducibility thing, but it could also just be because we approach the problem from a different perspective. Or, as I said before, even if you did it the exact same thing over two different areas, you would expect a different answer, but sometimes that answer is because you did something different and not because it was a different area.
Yeah. Any others? If not, I've got a couple of other little things I'd just like to add, just because, I mean, really great talk. I like seeing how you can do this, and that indeed a motto which I had molded myself to early in my astronomical career was steal everybody else's software is the right way to go, even if you have to learn a different language for it. And so I'm glad to hear that you're seeing what I sort of glommed onto, and I think other people who are successful at it, it doesn't matter what language it's written in. But the other comment I was going to make, though, is that you pointed out that the data discovery portion, which we focus a lot on, and is an important thing, especially given how much data is out there. Filtering out the wheat from the chaff is important, but a lot of that data discovery portion is also a data trust portion of what you do, and I don't think you can ever get rid of that. That's, if you hand me a bucket of data, I'm going to spend a long time, even if I can't do anything else, use any other data. I still have to come up with that. And that, to me, that my gut says that's 10% of your time. It's just making sure that you got the right data, that the data are right, that there's not something missing, there's not a bias, there's not, all of those pieces. And you can't do it any other way. So I'm glad to see that also came through in that.
I totally agree. And I think the reason I specifically mentioned it is because we really tend to focus on that. It's like, oh, only if I could do data discovery better, and only if I had fair data, I wouldn't do this. We're always going to do a significant part of our time on data for various reasons.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And people do want to just have the GUI plug and play, type something in a Google search box and then hook it up to a bunch of Python scripts and out comes a paper.
Sure.
That's a ways off.
I'm curious, related to data discovery, and I totally agree with what you say, not to mention things like uncertainty. What's the uncertainty of these data? The domain scientists know that, where the people that just pick the data up may not. But are the hubs using the schema.org mechanism for some? I know it's just a rudimentary data discovery right now in terms of the types of data stored in the repository. I'm just wondering if that's permeated through these larger data centers that you're representing here.
So if it's okay, gents, I'll respond to that. So the hubs actually don't have repositories. The hubs were developed to build public-private partnerships and cross-sector capacity and research, help support research development for grit to address challenges in each of the regions. So there is actually no infrastructure that's funded and run out of the hubs.
Okay, interesting. Yes.
And so from the other sort of aspect of organizations represented, I can talk about sort of TAC and the data work that we do around that. And it really is up to those projects and getting buy-in on the, honestly, there is a lift to migrating to a schema, and it's a hard thing to get people to agree to. And in some of our projects, we found it better to have a more flexible approach than any sort of fixed schema. Especially around, new and novel research where it's, the data themselves and how they are represented and gathered change. So I see some places where things like schema.org do come into play, but there's a lot out there where I think, it's the same sort of thing. It's a data trust issue. And there's always going to be data translation and data pieces around that. I think that falls into that same 10% of the data. Yeah, it'd be nice if everything were in the same units, but that's trivial. The hard part is making sure that the data align properly and
grid spacing and right.
Yeah, so as I said, taking one schema and migrating it to another is boring, but that's all it is.
Okay. Yeah, I would just say in EarthCube, they've really streamlined the implementation. I think they've done a good job. The folks that are doing that work. I'm not one of them, but I'm just aware of it. I'm actually the chair of the Leadership Council for EarthCube, so I'm more on the governance side. But I think they've done a good job in making the overhead to doing, it's basically some JSON LD code that you add to your website. They've done a good job of at least getting that started. But yeah, it doesn't go very far into things like trust and I think their hope is to build the type data set, the schema.org type data set, to include more things.
Sorry, I had to do an emergency door close. Try and keep the dog from barking in here. Oh, absolutely. So, well, we're a little bit over, we're 6 minutes over, but I just want to make sure there's not anything else that other people want to talk about. But if not, that long pause, I will go ahead and say, well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for a very nice talk. And I think there's some many interesting pieces around that. I know you're working with Yolanda from USC as well. So you probably know Suzanne Pierce, who works with me.
Oh yeah, yep, at TAC.
Yeah, so be very interested to keep touch on these and other things as things are moving forward for you guys.
Well, thanks for inviting us, and it was very nice meeting you all.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the great talk. Thanks a lot.
And everybody else.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a happy Thanksgiving, SC, and all that good stuff.
Ciao. Bye-bye.